And let's begin. Well, hey everybody. Thank you for coming in and seeing this stream today. This is the first of hopefully a couple of the Andrelczyk Amusement Academy, where I hope to teach you about realistic coaster building in RCT2 and maybe give you some behind-the-scenes tips and pointers about realistic coaster building and how real coasters relate to the ones in RCT. So I hope this becomes an interactive stream. I hope you guys use the chat and let me know what you're looking for, or what questions you've got, any of that kind of thing. It is my first time doing a bunch of stuff on stream, so feel free to tell me something's wrong if it doesn't seem right, and we will hopefully have a good time doing this. So what I thought I would do to start is really go from the very basics of coaster building and kind of build up from there, and then kind of talk through what makes the coasters, or what makes realistic coasters what they are, as far as the basic elements like stations, brakes, block brakes, lift hills, etc. And then we'd go into like what makes an inverted coaster what it is, what makes a B&M inverted coaster unique to a Vekoma, unique to a Fabry, to a Golden Horse, to whatever else we want to go into. So anyway, we'll guide it by what you guys want to see more so, but let's jump in. Why not? So I think as I've been putting together ideas for this whole stream, the first thing that always sticks out to me is like the key number one thing that you ought to know when you're building coasters in RCT is how to build block brakes. So block brakes, if you are building a ride, they're under the special things. Block brakes are different from regular brakes in that they split up the track into a number of block sections. So you can see this coaster train who's just passing through this block brake is holding, or is causing this one on the lift hill to hold until it comes off the lift. Now, I know a lot of you guys know what this is already. You've done it. It's a thing, but not everybody does, and I think it's a really key thing and really separates, at the very basic level, coaster realism in the game. So the idea is the block brakes break your coaster up into sections, and it's not just the block brake. So it's a lift hill, it's a station, and things like that. So if we take this coaster, we can magically go over here and see how these blocks work. So this coaster has 5 block sections, and we can see them here. So block 1 is the station itself. Block 2 is everything up through the lift hill, and the trigger here is off the chain lift. Block 3 is the first half of the coaster, including the mid-course brake run here, MCBR, as you might see it referred to in text. But once this one passes through the mid-course brake run, as you can see, this guy was going to hold here for just a second, and then as soon as he clears, then we're good to go. Fourth block here is the green section, the second half of the ride, and then number 5 is the brake run right here. So if I were to close this ride and speed up everything here, everybody's going to stack up right behind one another, not in the station like you would see if you were using continuous circuit mode. So you can see how they're all sitting stacked right up there. So continuous circuit, block section mode, there we go. Alright. So let's take a look at how you might build something like this. And offline. Come on back. Come on back. Alright. Hopefully you guys have me again. I know I dropped out for a second there. Let me know in the chat if it drops out. And I will get back to it. But anyway. So one of the things you need to pay attention to as you're doing block brakes and this kind of design is you don't need to have this you don't need to be off the lift hill by the time you're clearing the mid-course brake run. Like, you can adjust the timings of the actual ride itself in order to get off the get this so that this one doesn't hit the top of the lift hill and stop before the block breaks. So I think it's not something you need to worry about as far as that goes. But anyway, so we'll leave this one running so you can kind of see how that works. But the nice thing with this is that when you use block sections and not continuous circuit mode, you make the station exactly as long as the train needs to be, and that can vary. So we've got, you know, the B&M coasters like this floorless coaster that are awfully short because they have the short cars. So this is 8 cars right here, which is standard for a B&M floorless coaster, so that's fine. But we look at something like the corkscrew coaster, where we've got a let's pull one of those guys up. The corkscrew coaster has a lot longer cars. Can you all see everything okay? I know the feed went out just a little bit ago, but hopefully it's back. Cool. Good deal. Alright, so we're just going to make something here pretty simple. Actually, let's just do even less so than that. And honestly, we're not building this in any kind of a realistic way. So, just as a means of showing, and I mean, half of you guys already know this anyway, but the the corkscrew coaster is long. So we have usually 7 cars as a standard on a floorless coaster. So you can see that one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 station tiles long versus the floorless coaster here, which is 8 cars, one more, and is only 5 long. So really you need to make sure that you adjust your rides to fit the amount of train or vehicles that the ride would have. So this gets a lot of people when you build a boomerang, like a Vekoma boomerang coaster that you would see, because you want to make it, or some people want to make it a little too short. So let's get in here like we were going to build one of these, and let's go ahead and build it. So we know that this is 7 tiles, because that's how big it needs to be. We're going to go through here and remove all of these again. I do hope this is a bug that gets fixed at some point. Alright. And for a Vekoma boomerang, we're going to come out the back side here and use our lift hill, and then come up the front. We're going to build a cobra roll. You can put a space in between if you want. It gives you a little bit more space in the middle. The challenge is this is one of those rides that RCT that doesn't translate super well into RCT because the real thing is kind of like a V shape. So it's a little bit awkward in that it doesn't quite fit where you would want it to. So we're going to put 1 flat on the front side and then 2 flats on the back side, just so that we line it up exactly with this one. And then that's how you would set it up. It looks a little bit longer than if you just did it kind of standard, but I think it's probably the better way to do it. And then this one is reverse inclined launched shuttle mode. So put our station platforms here. And here we go. So one of the things that translates kind of poorly, I think, when you're first starting to play RCT is the use of flat track or kind of variable sloped hills, because you don't want to put a lot of flat track in because it doesn't look good, and sometimes you don't want to put in a lot of the hills that go from shallow to steep, kind of like I did for the 2 spikes here. But in the end, I think it looks better to do that, and it is going to help your G-forces a little bit. It's going to help your ratings. In the end, I don't build for ratings, and when you're building for realistic coasters in the game, you're generally not going to be building for ratings either. But if you build it properly, realistically, it's gonna be fine. Like, your ratings are gonna be okay. Worst case, you can adjust them if you need to. Not totally cheating, but this is something to kind of look at. So one of the things that I had brought up, and we'll get to in a minute, is some of my old rides. So these are 3 coasters that I built in Watkins Woods Park, which was my first spotlight a while ago, long while ago. And they're not very good coasters, so we're gonna make them better. But you can kind of see here where these hills all go from just flat to shallow to steep, right up and in. And it's just really abrupt. I mean, it looks fine if you're used to playing kind of the scenario play within the game, but it really is such a steep transition and a tight transition that you really want to try and avoid that. For some. Fair enough. It wasn't a very good spotlight, let's be fair. So as far as you go with stations, lifts, brakes, things like that, so general rule is every coaster is going to have 1 station. You're really not going to have more than that unless you want a capacity boost, in which case you can have a load station and an unload station. For some rides like traveling fair coasters and that sort of thing, you can do kind of the 1 load station, the 1 unload station. Older wooden coasters tended to have 2 stations in them, but for the most part, you're just going to have 1 station. You're also going to have 1 lift. You really shouldn't have to have more than 1 lift, unless you're building a couple exceptions. Unless you're building a mine train coaster, which could be 2 lifts, could be 3 lifts, could be more, theoretically. Let me turn that down just a little bit. Alright, tell me if that's better, if the music is a little bit better. But so you're only going to use 1 lift. If you have to have another lift, you've probably done it wrong. Either your ride's too long for the height or whatsoever. But I mean, as I've said, there's exceptions to everything. So you take the Ultimate at Lightwater Valley, for example. It's massive. It's one of the longest coasters in the world, and it has 2 lift hills. Most mine trains are going to have more lift hills than 1, so usually you're going to have 2 or 3. One of the cool things about mine trains is that it's like a dueling coaster without actually being a dueling coaster, because the lift hills line up. So we'll build one of those in a second because I think they're fun. Let's talk about brake runs though real quick, because this is honestly one of the things that I see more than most done incorrectly in the game as far as realism goes. This one is actually a little bit short, even though it properly catches all the blocks. So we have our station, train 1, train 2, and a little bit more. The brake runs really need to be pretty darn long. And now this varies per coaster, but let's take B&M for example, since we're talking those guys already. Really, you want to have, for your brakes, we have our train here, then you're going to put your block brake, because I always build my brake run backwards. I build it right back out of the station, and then I make sure that I do this ahead of time so that when I'm building my layout and I come back to the end, I don't short myself at the end. Good call on Big Bad Wolf. Great coaster. Gone too soon, apparently. Or, absolutely. It was a great coaster, one of my favorites, actually. Sad to see it go, for sure. So we'll build another 5 back, because we know that's how long the station is. Then you put another block. And then you're going to build another 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's kind of your base for 1 train, 2 trains, 3 trains. And then what you generally want to do is have another couple, maybe even up to 5 more. And this part you can separate by, say, a turn, for example. And you can gradiate this up so it slows down slowly. I would suggest going through and doing that. Usually when I build, I'm just building all the blocks at whatever the standard brake speed is, but then I'll go back through and I'll shorten them up a little bit later. So start it like this. But this would be a good setup for a standard 3-train B&M coaster, because you've got the space for 1, 2, and then 3. So if we just kind of mock this up real quick and go through here. And we'll put our little mid-course here. So this would be 3 trains, because you have a lift, a mid-course brakes, and then you have enough blocks to handle it on the back end. So you can see they all stack up here. You probably want another 1 or 2 here, but the idea is these are called hold brakes, and they're going to basically be waiting, hold, and then this is the slowdown brake zone. So this isn't used to stop a train. Really, you want to be using brakes or a separate brake run to slow the train versus stopping the train on a block just like this one. And this applies to most B&Ms. Now, if you go look at some Intamin coasters, especially some of the early Intamin Mega coasters, those had a lot less space. Really, theirs was just stop the train plus a couple more, and honestly, they're kind of terrifying when you ride them in real life. So speaking of real life, so one of the recommendations that everybody should have when they build coasters is using the coaster database. So here we are on the coaster database, rcdb.com. Let's pick Superman at New England, for example. One of the best coasters in the world. We definitely voted one of the best coasters in the world for quite a while. Let's take this guy. So you can see here's the train. This is a 9-car train, I believe, which is substantial. They are huge coasters, or coaster trains. So you can see the one and how long it is here sitting on the transfer track. The brake run, this is all that the brake run is. Pretty short. And so it's just about the length of the train itself. So there's the differences between B&M, which has a substantially large amount of brake run, versus this Intamin, which has pretty much nothing. And you do come cruising in there pretty hard to a stop. As far as trains go, even if you have a ton of brakes in the back, you really shouldn't ever have 3 trains unless you have a mid-course brake run in the middle, or you have like a load station and an unload station, because there's no point. Because you figure if you have 3 trains, let's say this brake run didn't exist, and you had 3 trains stacked up here, the first one goes out and then goes up the lift hill, and once it's off, the other one can go up the lift hill, but it can't go anywhere until that one gets all the way back home and into the brakes. So really, you're just sitting there. You don't gain anything out of it. So you want to have that brake run there for it. I sure am. Thank you. As you can see, this is not my forte, I suppose, to start out. So let's build a mine train, because I think that's a good look at block brakes and also just how to build multiple lift hills, stations, etc. So we're going to build it with the corkscrew coaster, mostly because I like using this as it is usually the base for mine train coasters, not necessarily the wood look that you have with the actual mine train coaster in game. Usually you'd see that up underneath, but like the railroad ties up underneath. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and just build this as a corkscrew coaster. So let's do this. We're going to go ahead and transition this to mine train. I'm actually using the Vekoma mine train that Space K made. You can download this on New Element, and I think it's a good looking vehicle. Let's see how long that is. So still actually need another. Alright, we'll call that day with 6 cars there. See if the engine counts as one. Okay, so in this case, we have 5 there. Let's cut this down by 1. We'll call that. There we go. Yeah, I can get that Superman. It doesn't seem. It doesn't seem like a great layout, but it's a surprisingly good coaster, I would say. And it just continues to deliver as far as airtime goes and things like that. So one of the things that we're going to do with this Vekoma mine train is, like I said earlier, they have these side-by-side lifts, which are really cool, and we're going to build that in. We're going to do that ahead of time, so I'm going to build it first. They don't necessarily duel. You're really not going to see that terribly often, but at some point you might get a little bit of a variation, or like one on the bottom of the lift, one on the top of the lift, so something interesting like that. Yeah, Millennium Force was one of my favorite coasters, and honestly still is one of the better ones that I've done. What we'll do here is we're going to cross over to begin with, and you look at the clearance checks, which I've disabled. You can sometimes get away with cutting some corners there as far as going through clearances that the game won't let you do, but really you have plenty of space with. Because honestly, if I turned off clearances now and did one of these guys, you're going to have the space, but I will respect the game this time, and go through and build this one up higher. So a mine train layout is a pretty simple layout, and honestly this is probably a little bit big. Let's back it down to something like this. You want a mine train coaster to have a lot of turns, a lot of helixes, and there's a difference between, say, a Vekoma mine train and an Arrow mine train. Arrow is the original mine train. They started out basically the steel tubular track, and they're sort of the owners of the whole thing. So theirs were a lot, I guess, jerkier is probably the best word for it, as far as layouts go, and there was not a lot of flow to those layouts. But now Vekoma came in and built these with probably a little more flow to them. Still have the same sort of deal, is low to the ground, a lot of corners, a lot of helixes. Eat them off of my water. Excuse me. Sorry for that peak. So what we're going to do is just do a bunch of little corners in here. We're not going to get too long because the ride itself generally isn't that long. But we will go kind of up and down through some of these things. Let's actually do a little bit of a diving turn here. You just want to have a little bit of variation throughout your entire layout. So one of the things when you're building for a flow standpoint, and flow is this sort of nebulous term that people use and it's really kind of hard to define, is what makes a coaster look good from one element to the next. Flow isn't tied to realism. Like, you can have a totally unrealistic coaster that has great flow, and but it's really just purely about the look. So one of the things that you kind of think of here is you want to be, doing something or heading to something. You don't want to meander. So like my initial thing here is I wanted to bring a helix in, but I wanted it to be outside the lift hill, so not going underneath of it. But this also got me the elevation I needed to cross underneath the lift hill. And then I came back up, but I wanted to go back down again, because really you want to try and avoid doing something, stopping, and then doing that same thing again. So like if you went up, turned, and then went up again, that's generally going to look a little strange. Or if you turned to the right, went straight, or did like a hill, and then turned again to the right, it's going to look a little bit strange. You want to try and avoid those sorts of pitfalls when you're building, because if you can make it look like it goes from one element to the next and has this nice little flow to it, then it's going to feel a lot better as far as layouts go. So we've come across right here, and let's see if it'll let us. It's not going to. But so we're going to come in here with a big helix and come across, and see that we cannot do what I wanted to do, but that's fine. To be honest, this is getting a little bit long, so actually what we're going to do is go back through here and simplify this out. So because I turned left here, before I turn left again, I'm generally going to want to turn right. I will do. Fortunately, we have some clearance issues there. There we are. And now we'll come back down. We'll head into the brakes. This is not the best looking thing, so what are we going to do about it? So what doesn't look good about this is we have this big helix into a small corner. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is that we dropped this helix here, and then we have another little hill right here into the brakes. So we want to avoid that also. One of the things you could do to avoid that is instead of having that, you go up and then you go down into the final bit. We're going to want to try something else. Why not? So let's go ahead and take this, and we're going to turn the corner here, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which, if we go back through here, well, that. Okay. So here's another solution, and unfortunately the corkscrew coasters in the game never added the banked corner. That's not to say that they don't bank. They absolutely do in the real thing. So they always look a little silly as far as cornering goes and everything, but this is a way that we can make this work. So we're going to go left here, drop down, go right, then we're going to go back up, kind of do this little S-bend deal, and then come back down. Not necessarily the favorite, but I think for now it'll work. One of the things too, I think every coaster you build, unless it doesn't have an option like the bobsled coaster, ought to have a diagonal in it. Diagonals really help break the grid of this game. It's really difficult to get into a situation where you try and get out of that whole grid look, and it can really look bad if you just have a bunch of right turns or 180-degree turns. It just doesn't look great. Alright, so let's have our second little bit here. So this lift hill is a little bit taller, so we can cross over on here. And one of the things is this section, or second half, is usually a little bit more thrilling. So for whatever reason, this side has a little bit more going on. Edger, what do you mean by using corkscrew track? That is what I'm using. You mean something different. Go ahead and change track type to something more normal here. So we're going to start with a drop here, and then we're actually going to do a big drop down. A lot of times these are going to have mountains in the middle. You'll notice at the bottom of this drop, since we're going to be traveling pretty quickly, I put a flat piece. Same with here. You should really get into practice at the bottom of all of your hills putting a flat piece. It's going to look way better in the end, and it's going to give a lot nicer look overall than if you don't have one. Alright, so now we're going to come back up and try and kill off some of that speed. Too much. And so now, from a flow standpoint, we can kind of see it's getting a little bit messy, but we crossed underneath this, but we have this gap right between these two bits. So we have this side and this side. So let's come through and see if we can build something here, which we can't. So that's just great. But what we will go ahead and do is consider something else. So let's consider a larger drop here up underneath. And there's nothing wrong with flat track, especially when you consider theming, because you can easily theme this into something. So we can cross up and over. Can you do block brakes on a merged track coaster? Yeah, you can actually. I'll show you that in just a second. So OpenRCT actually gives us a really great opportunity to do that in an easier way than it used to be. It used to, if you wanted to do block brakes, it took quite a while and was just kind of a pain in general. All right, I'm not picking this, but. You don't, actually. You don't have to shoestring it at all. Let me get through this guy real quick. We'll just, for the purposes of this, will come through here and... No, you're fine, you're fine. This is what I want. I want it to be interactive, and I want you guys to ask questions. So let me show you what we're gonna do. So one of the things that I like to do here, just as we wrap up with this one, is we started with that helix up top, so doing another little bit and kind of working our way down. Very few big drops on mine trains. Is we've got this little drop here that goes across one and then underneath another, and then underneath this one. You kind of want to alternate going up underneath and up over top of other tracks. Would you ever put an airtime hill on this kind of a mine train? Generally, no. A lot of these mine trains, as far as lap bars go, it's like either a single position lap bar and not necessarily built for airtime. Like if you ever ridden Big Thunder, you get a little bit of airtime, but not anything extreme. You might have a little airtime. You're never going to have anything that's got a real big peak. Like you're not going to do this on a mine train, but you might have something where you have a pretty shallow hill up and then a shallow hill down. So if we jump back to the database, and I'm going to remember to go back this time because you guys told me the last time. So let's look at Wallaby, Belgium, and Calamity Mines. So this is kind of what we're basing this ride off of. You can kind of see here that it's doing the this thing with the double lift hill that they have covered, and then we're just kind of working our way down. It's a lot of these low to the ground helixes, all on the ground. So airtime hills, here you have an airtime hill, more or less. It's just really stretched. So that's about the extent of what you want to do for airtime hills in the game, in my opinion. Alright, there we go. Actually went back. So we have our fast little helix here, and honestly this is probably too fast. We want to come up just a little bit, so we don't... not going to get too aggressive here. Mine trains are definitely a little easier than that. And then one of the things actually that you can look at here is that all of these are downward helixes so far. So here's one, here's one, here's one, all the standard ones. This guy is an upwards helix, but you do want to adjust that a little bit. Like you don't want to go too heavily on one side and not the other. So here we can kind of do one of those little hills, for example. But you want to put especially with that kind of a hill, in RCT anyway, you want to put a flat piece on the top just to stretch it out a little bit and make it space it out as far as that goes. But then we'll get... I'm trying to think of the best way to end this, because I don't necessarily want to end it so quickly, but you're right. Arrow did have the St. Louis mine train, and theirs it was definitely more of a abrupt changes of directions, and that kind of faked some airtime, I suppose. It definitely gave you the feel that you were going through a lot of pretty aggressive hills and turns and things like that. But Arrow mine trains feel like they have a lot less design prowess behind them, to be honest. Like, I think that's kind of sounds mean, but that's probably the best way to put it. Is they kind of feel like they just kind of meander and do stuff, and then when and the layout just kind of happens. So not necessarily my favorite as far as that goes. So in the diagonal, you can kind of forego any of the comments about flat track and bits like that, because the diagonal in the game is going to be way more stretched out than the straight sections. So I think you can kind of consider that just kind of as is. But let's take 3 trains here, and there we go. So let's have a watch on this, and then I'll show you the merged option. Or not the merged option, the block breaks with merged track. Because it's actually surprisingly easy now that they've added the ability to change ride types kind of on the fly. You didn't used to be able to do that, and it was much more of a pain. And I can show you how you did it, though, on the old ones. We're picking up some speed here, just kind of a little bit as you go. You get this little dip. Get some speed in there. And we'll cross underneath the lift hill. I do like having some kind of interactions there. So this lift hill is slow enough that if I didn't set these brakes too low, which I didn't, looks like this one's going to engage the lift hill before the other one's off. So that's kind of nice. You get a little bit of interaction there. But you have that one stopping, so I would go in there when I opened the ride and adjust the dispatch time to be more than the minimum 10 seconds, which you're never really going to get if you've got a full train load of beeps. But just in case, it's good to have there. So the second half of this is too short. We probably ought to have had a little bit more in there, but it's definitely more exciting. We got those 2 big curving drops, and then our little diagonal bit. The brake run sticks out the back farther than you'd want. Typically, if I was going to do this again, I'd probably turn here and then just extend the brake run all the way down the ride and come back to the end. So let's see how we're going over this. 30 miles an hour is going to give us some pretty decent airtime there, but not too bad. This is going to be sort of an in-the-middle thing. You would usually end with maybe another helix in the other direction and then come back. So not necessarily the best ending here, but for something on the fly, I think it's not too bad. But let's look at a block brake coaster. So what we're going to do is look at a Mock Rides Large Park Wild Mouse. Let's pick a space way in the middle. That's what we have this for. Alright. So Mock Rides has made a couple of wild mice varieties, including custom varieties, but we are going to look at the Large Park Mouse, which is one of their larger options, and something you can find at the Legoland parks, a number of the Cedar Fair parks, like King's Dominion, King's Island, and there's some others as well. Alright, so let's... we're not going to go for a full recreation here just because I don't probably have the time to do it, but let's do this. And so the big tenet of this kind of ride is that here we have a big diagonal drop. So what we're going to do is go into this, you're going to find this, and then in your cheats menu, you have enabled all the cheats pretty much, except for the invalid heights. I don't like to enable that one because you can accidentally build at the wrong height, so it's just better to avoid it entirely. But let's go in here and we're going to actually change the track to mini roller coaster. So we're going to do that. And then we'll kind of come up here, and if I recall right, there's actually some momentum challenges with when you do this. That looks terrible, but not gonna... well, we will run this just to see it. It's just not gonna look good. Alright, so then we're gonna go back in here and go to... I'll see if I can find it. Steel Wild Mouse. Cool. So you'll see that all of those were invisible. All of the bits that we just built. So that's fine, just leave it. And then you're going to come through here and you can kind of build your stuff with your block brakes as you would normally. Generally, there's going to be a block section on each of these. The challenge with blocks is that they slow down the ride so much on RCT, and so it's not really something that you want to get heavily into, because you're just going to kill the speed of your ride. But I mean, it's important to have them on the coasters, and I understand from this new save file, supposedly you're going to have the ability to speed adjust block breaks, or that's a thing that could be added. So let's hope it is. Because you need to make sure when you build your block breaks that any block can, if the train stops there, can make it home again. So if it can't make it home, then you didn't do it right. The block I'm doing is just making sure trains don't stack in the station, but I just got. So let's just bring this one home. Actually, it'll be easier just to show it this way. So what you can't have is a block break on the merge stuff. You can't have a, or well, actually, I don't think you can. I guess I don't know why not, but let's take a look at this, and ooh, 6 cars. Okay. You can see we're running blocks, even though we did merge this. Not necessarily merged exactly, but we did go ahead and change the type. So what you're going to do just to build that back is just build this in reverse, so it doesn't actually merge in there. So you'll take this guy. And do that. And so you can see it's properly operating block sections, and it's merged. So if you did this the old way, before you have OpenRCT's ability to do this, so let's say you had a coaster here, and then you merged it into a godly reason. So if you did this, what you actually have to do, so that's merged now. What you got to do is build another piece of track from your starting coaster. And then you got to go in here with the tile inspector, and before you had to do this with map object manipulation, and align this up. And basically what you did is the ride thinks it's a complete circuit, and this is how you were able to run some of these without changing the operating mode. So if you do this and then run it back home, the ride thinks it's a complete circuit, but it will still merge into this and go in that direction. So that was how you would do something like a B&M flying coaster, where you built a big pretzel loop and did it with the floorless, or the 4D coaster, for example, and you built it in like that. So something to consider for sure. But now you don't have to do that. Much easier. OpenRCT has saved a ton of time as far as things like that goes. I mean, this kind of thing, if you wanted to do the blocks, would take forever. But yeah, the other, that's right. You gotta, you can just switch it in Tile Inspector. Honestly, there's a lot of things you can do in Tile Inspector now that are just a lot easier, as far as, you know, switching tracks as far as merging goes, and some other things like that. It's just, it makes a world of difference from what it used to. Let's take a look at some of these as far as the flow goes. And yeah, that is a good comment. definitely save before you test. Save, save, save. And honestly, still on OpenRCT, save. I've managed to crash the game a couple of times too. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how, but I have. So, things to consider. Yeah, it's not something you want to catch yourself later on. And thankfully, OpenRCT has the save feature, which makes a big difference. But you can never be too careful. All right, so let's look at this coaster. This was in Watkins Woods. This was Big Dipper. This is based off of Big Dipper at Geauga Lake in Ohio, which is sadly demolished now. This was a John Miller coaster. So John Miller was one of the early wooden coaster designers from the 1920s or so. Kind of worked alongside, but predated a little bit Herbert Schmeck, who also did wooden coasters at the time. So we have our tight corner up here, and then a big drop into this pretty substantial hill there, and then these little small hills, this kind of slow unbanked turnaround, and then a final couple of hills here before the brakes at the backside. In general, older wooden coasters are going to have a little bit more abrupt transitions. So this, you can honestly kind of get away with this, but as far as the look of RCT goes, you really want to space things out just a little bit. So I'm going to rebuild this, and we're going to see how it looks. So 14 is the top height there, 10 is our turnaround. So let's go with that. So we're going to use the 3-bench PTC trains. So those are the 6-seater wooden coaster cars. Really, you'd use these on more out and back coasters than twisters, but that's not to say you can't use the other ones. These are just, the longer the train, the harder it turns. So just because the wheelbase is so wide, especially for these kind of wooden coasters. So you really just want to avoid that. But again, there's exceptions to every rule. So for example, Texas Cyclone at Six Flags Astroworld, which is now demolished, had 4-bench PTCs originally, which were just huge. And the Beast up in Kings Island also runs 3-bench PTCs, which is pretty substantial there. Alright, so I usually like to put at least one straight piece between a corner and the beginning of the lift. The lift approach is different depending on what kind of ride you're going to build. If you build a B&M, for example, let's go back and look at our big one here. So this is an old school B&M start. This is an early 90s B&M pre-lift section. So it would drop out, have this little dip, and then come up, and then it would have 2 sets of brakes, and then the lift hill. This was on every B&M, and you still typically see this on, even if it's a flat bit, you're still going to see the brakes before the lift hill, because the idea is the brakes set the train to the same speed as the lift hill so that it doesn't put strain and wear and tear on the lift hill itself when the train engages it. So these brakes ought to be set with whatever your lift hill speed is. Now granted, your lift hill here is 5, and you're not going to set these for 4 typically, so you just set them for 9, which is the second slowest, and going to deal with that. Miles per hour, that is. Anyway, let's back to our wooden coaster here. So we are going to look at 14, and actually I'm going to go one more. That way, when I come off the lift hill, and I like to extend the chain up and over the top just a little bit, so then it gives it the ability to disengage the lift just a little bit. And then as far as drops go, you can go pretty much immediately into steep if you want to. You can also stretch it as well, but at the bottom you definitely want to stretch it like this. Now, a couple things to consider is this one's on the ground now. Modern coasters, especially steel coasters and things like that, never ever 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 put them on the ground. Same with ride stations and things like that. Never ever ever put a ride station on the ground. There are exceptions, but for the most part, just don't do it. Older wooden coasters had really, really low bends, and it made for a little bit of a a thing where you see some old pictures where there's like weeds growing up through the track itself. So a little more acceptable on an older wooden coaster like this, but generally you want to avoid it. So we're going to avoid it for most of the rest of the layout. Hey Oldenwood, thank you for joining. Hope you're having a good day. So we're going to do the same bit here, and then we can extend this up. So you can do this in a couple of different ways. So why don't you put them on the ground? Okay, so ride stations, typically you're going to have stuff underneath the station as far as equipment goes. Sometimes you're going to have just a compressor room, sometimes you're going to have various other equipment. So in general, a coaster station has stuff underneath. So that's one reason. Second reason is a lot of times you'll drop off out of the station, you'll drop a little bit to engage the lift hill. You want to give yourself room for that. It just doesn't look good when it stays on the ground itself and then goes immediately onto the lift hill. You're almost always going to see something there. I mean, you could put it on the ground if you excavate out a little bit of space for essentially a basement to your coaster, but for the most part, every coaster you encounter in real life, you're going to see the station and every part of the ride up off the ground. For the steel coasters, you just need room for the footers and the supports. An older wooden coaster like this, you're going to have the bents and the ledgers. So the bent is, if you look at this structure here, and you can kind of see the vertical line. So if you cut a cross section through the coaster, the bent is those bits and pieces. I actually think we have. Let's take a look at our custom scenery here. For lack of a better use of something, we are going to call. Here we go. All right, so this bit is the bent. So the way the wooden coasters are built is there's these, which are bents, and they're going to be put one in a row after each other like this. The top bit is called the ledger beam. That's what the track sits on top of. And then you have stringers, which are all the horizontal bits that come across. So the stringers would be something like this that comes across and connects these to strengthen it. And then you're going to have the battens, which are the diagonal bits as well. So that's how a wooden coaster is built. We look at this hill, and we can do a couple of different things. So we're going to do this smoother hill like this. Because it's an older coaster, this is going to be a little more abrupt over the top. There's no reason why we couldn't also come in here and smooth this out a little bit. You want a really long and really smooth hill, then you put a flat bit in the top, like this. To be honest, that's almost too smooth. So unless you're going at a pretty breakneck speed, you just don't want to do that. It's just gonna be a little bit much. So we're gonna leave that guy alone, and we'll go through here and do this. So that's how you would do this typically, and we're at 11 here and at 14 there, so we should be fine as far as spacing goes. But let's make sure we're all set here. Shift that down to one train too, so we can look at that. You do. So typically you're going to want the supports to be shown. I would say only on old wooden coasters, such as this one, which I'm basing this one off of, which is 1925. That is, I guess, acceptable to be on the ground. It's still not best practices, I would say. You still want it to be up off the ground a little bit. So as a consideration, you can kind of come in here and do a little bit of work on it, and you could adjust the landscape a little bit to do that. If you find yourself in a design where the bottom of your ride is hitting the ground for whatever reason, then just adjust the landscape. Landscapes are very rarely fully flat, so you can adjust the landscape to work with your coaster, so you can make it work. Let's jump back over one more time to this guy. You can see I have this little awkward bump on the backside of the corkscrew. Typically this would just be lowered down and turned into a trench of some kind, so then we can get a footer up underneath of that. because you want at least the one tile there so you can get a footer plus one little bit of column on there. It's not to say that some B&Ms don't go, and others, not just B&M, go straight pretty much to the ground on top of a footer, but you at least need the footer in there and it needs to be visible. So best practice is to just say keep it one off of the bottom and you're fine. Alright, so let's keep on going. What we did here is had a small hill, like a speed hill. We'll do the same thing again. But what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and turn this ahead of time. So let's talk banking real quick. So you can bank, you generally want to bank all your corners. Diagonals are the one that you can really take it or leave it. Older wooden coasters and CCI wooden coasters, Custom Coasters International, they are underbanked. And that was on purpose. CCIs are done so because it made them cheaper. When you bank them to a certain amount, you need to add an extra piece of wood to the ledger beam, so it got more expensive. So in order to avoid that, they underbanked their coasters. So that was one of the benefits of a CCI, is it was cheaper. So you can consider that when you're building those kind of coasters. And then older wooden coasters, you're going to have the same sort of thing, is in general they're going to be a little bit underbanked. But if you have a steel coaster or things like that, typically you're going to bank it, unless in your head it's kind of meant to be like a shallow little change of direction where the banking would be really subtle, then just don't bank it. It might have a little bit of a debuff to your stats, but on the most part, I think you're generally going to be fine. Okay. So like I said before, in diagonal, you kind of ignore the rules of this with the low slope into the steep slope. It's not something you really need on the diagonal, especially because it makes it look a little more stretched out. So we're going to do our turnaround here. We're going to do it flat. Let's make sure that this still works. I do recommend using this ghost train just to give it a little bit of information. So just barely. What we can do actually too to add a little bit of realism here. This adds realism but also screws up your block system, so just FYI. A lot of older wooden coasters have a chain lift section at the, well, not a chain lift, an anti-rollback at the peak of various tall hills. And the reason that happens, looks like I'm out again. Alright, coming back. Okay, cool. I think we are working again. There's a big storm going on outside, so I don't know if that's wreaking havoc with the internets per se. But we were saying about the chain lift here. So the chain lift was, I keep saying chain lift, it's the anti-rollback, which is just the anti-rollback teeth. The idea was for rides like this where the turns were typically taken very slowly, you had the anti-rollback here in case it was a little too windy or a little too cold or whatever it was, and the coaster didn't make it up the whole way, then it's not going to roll backwards in valleys somewhere where it's a lot harder to get off. You're going to get it stuck right here. So let's say this was a little too windy and it got stuck right there. And it's going to lump back, and it's just going to hang on that anti-rollback, and then it's a lot easier to rescue the coaster and get it back running again. So that's why you had those. Now it is going to wreak havoc with your block system, because that's going to be considered a block trigger. So now this previous block, everything off of the lift hill up to this, now becomes a block, and then we start a new one here. But with two trains, we can fudge it and make it look okay. So what we're going to do now is we can do a couple of different things. So we can drop like a big one down here and then turn the corner. And now we're lined up again. You can see I banked these. We're not going to bank those. We will end this a little bit early, and then we'll come up and trying to figure out how we want to do this. You know what you can do to add a little bit of interest here? A flat bit here. No shame in flat track. Even on the diagonal. Space things out a little bit and kind of do what you need to do. So we're going to call this basically a double down. And you can see that we're out of space here. So what we said we would do before is we're just going to make it work for us. Because I like the element here. And I do like it crossing up underneath. So we're going to go ahead and just leave it like that. And now we also have a little bit of a lower hill to do here on the return run. Now we do have to level this thing out again, so the challenge with doing big dips like this is you end up with something that's a little bit awkward to work with on the way down, so we will have to deal with that. But the nice thing is you can do, you know, a lot of different things. Use those before in order to not have the super slow block breaks. Yeah, I get that. That's an easy way to, I say cheat, but it's not cheating. It's just using your resources. It's a good way to make that work, for sure. Okay, we can do a couple of different things. We can go all the way back up to 10, but let's see what that looks like here as it crosses over. It may be too much. It's kind of a nice hill there, and a lot of these older wooden coasters you would see, rarely are you going to see a lot of really fast hills. You'll see a lot of old pictures of wooden coasters where all the hills are just slightly slower than the last one, so it just kind of goes on forever. But we're just dragging through here, so this is probably not going to work, but let's take a look. Now, you can adjust the friction in the game in OpenRCT. Yeah, a little bit too slow. A little bit slower than we want it to be. So we're going to avoid that. But now I am going to go ahead and put in a flat piece right there. And we're just going to make this last section here pretty quick. One of the other things that you try and do, and I kind of like to do, is here we're going to get this to line up. There we go. Could you make it one lower, tighten the top? No, I mean you could definitely go a little bit lower. The problem that I had with that is that coming off of the steep here, we're still traveling pretty quick because we're only at 6 height. So we want to stretch it out just a little bit, so it's going to just make this a little more smooth over the top. We're going to just kind of leave that as it is, and then we'll put the flat piece on top. If I was a little bit higher, like if I was, say, 8 or 9, then yeah, I would be a little tighter on top. This does look awkward, I'll be honest. It does look a little bit strange with the slope, but then I think in general it ends up being alright. On the hill, it wouldn't make it. Yeah, that is true. You could do that one also. You can make it a little bit tighter. And go that way. So that is a totally valid option. And then we will go back through here, and the one thing that I did like about this layout is that it kind of wrapped the lift hill structure, but we're not going to do that here considering that we're already into it. But we will go ahead and drop this down, and that's just a little bit too much. And I had banked that a second ago. It's this one's banked also. This is another one of those middle ground kind of things. Do you want it banked? Do you not want it banked? I think I do want it banked. So we will go ahead and keep that up at that it is, so we can be at 4, and then we'll, you know, the challenge a lot of times is just ending these, just trying to make sure that you got the right distance. So what we're gonna do is just do a little hill here, and you can't really see it in there, so that's going to be a pretty strong airtime hill there in the middle, but we did put a flat bit on top, and then we will go in here and put some brakes. So again, these old wooden coasters had some other fun stuff. So they had skid brakes, and those don't have a clamp like the brakes that you currently see here in the game. So that allowed them to be used on corners and also on stations. So a lot of stations, you have corner stations on a lot of these older wooden coasters, and that's a totally valid thing to do. You can do it pretty easily in the game now. So that is a totally valid option to do. You just might want to get some scenery in there that makes it look like a brake. One of the ones that I would recommend is the Steel Wild Mouse track. You can overlay that in there, but unfortunately that doesn't have the large corner or the medium corner, so you can't necessarily do as much. 5 miles an hour is probably appropriate for a lift hill speed. Kind of go at whatever, but let's take a look. Alright, we're gonna go the classic all brown. Do this. So a lot of the older wooden coasters were whitewashed, just because it protected the wood. Current pressure treated wood, which is what a lot of wooden coasters use now. So Southern Yellow Pine is the wood of choice for GCI wooden coasters. You don't want them painted white because then it hides issues. When you're doing your track inspections, it'll hide the issues of for the maintenance guys. So you don't want to paint those. Older wooden coasters, which was just untreated lumber, you did. It gave it some life or additional lifespan, so that was why they kept painting it with the pretty heavy wood or whitewash color. Alright, so there we go. I think that looks alright. The ratings are probably going to be lousy once they show up. But you see we've got... that's not bad, actually. So even with these unbanked corners, I mean, this last one is taken fast. I don't think I would have been... I wouldn't have been real upset to see that one banked. The challenge you run into is consistency. If you're doing a coaster like this, you want to be consistent about how you bank your corners. So because I'm not banking these two, which are taken at speed, I don't want to bank this one. If I had banked these two and this one, that would have been fine because this one is unbanked and this one is unbanked because they're taken slowly. So you kind of go back and forth about how you want to actually do that. I would say you can go either way, just make it consistent. So I'd mentioned a second ago curved stations for one. Let's do one of those real quick. We are going to build a Vekoma Whirlwind. So a Vekoma Whirlwind, let's jump out into the database real quick. Whirlwind. So let's take a look at Knoebel Whirlwind. Doesn't have great pictures, but we can take a look at Speed Stick. So this is a Whirlwind from Vekoma. This is one of the smaller coasters built with inversions that you can ride. There's two varieties. There's the Whirlwind and there's the Tornado. The Whirlwind has two corkscrews back-to-back and entirely right-hand corners, except for the station and the final brakes. There's also the Tornado, which replaces the first corkscrew with a loop. There's a couple of those. You can find one at Tokyo Summerland. You can find another at Tusenfryd in Norway. But there's a variety to be had. But you can see here that the station is curved. You can see this cool structure for the supports over top of the station. But the station itself has this kind of dog leg in it. So we're going to do that in our game. And we'll go back here and take a look. So this one's pretty low to the ground, on the ground. So let's start there. And now a Whirlwind has... I believe 7 car trains, as most of these do. So what we're going to do is make sure that we have that. Bag it up. Take 7 cars. Alright. Really, as far as stations go, the only one you actually need is the front station. You really don't need any of the other station platform pieces on your layout, because it's only that front one that actually offers any kind of use. In general, I'm going to make all my stations invisible anyway, because they're a lot easier to theme. So what I would recommend when you're building a steel or a wooden coaster is not the best look, but for something like this, what I would recommend you do is go back through and make this invisible one at a time with the tile inspector. The other way you can make this invisible is by taking the track and moving it below surface. That gets rid of the supports, but not the track itself, so that's one way to get rid of wooden coaster supports for sure. Now we're going to go back through, and we will build a build backwards, because then you don't merge it accidentally. Let's turn on our clearances. So here we go. Let's get him out of the way so we can kind of see what we want to do. I still like to put brakes in here just because it will simulate what you're actually going to have, but you don't want to fill the thing with brakes. B&Ms aren't actually going to have brakes. They're going to have drive tires, which the drive tire is basically it's a friction drive more than anything. It's a tire that pushes up on the bottom of the track and then drives it along. So I would say you can put 2 brakes in there just in case. I do one, since this is a 5-tile station, I'm going to do one on number 2 tile and one on number 4 tile just to space it out a little bit. You can kind of do that however you want, though. Alright. So we were in the process of building this whirlwind. There's a couple of different ways to do this, but you just want to have a corkscrew to the right. I come up and back down. Corkscrew to the right. And then, so the real one, I believe, pops up. These guys, so the drops are kind of together. And this is where it can get a little bit ugly, depending on how you do it. Get rid of the clearances here. It just depends how you want to go about the overall look. There's a reason that I don't do a lot of recreations of coasters, is because I don't think they typically look good in the game, and the changes that you have to make in order to get them to look good, in my opinion, aren't typically worth it. So that's why I avoid them in general. So we are just going to go for the single bit here. Now we can extend that out a little bit if we wanted. So if we wanted to have the exit platform here just a little bit more. And we put the block brakes on here. Like I dropped a set of block brakes on there, but you don't need them. The ride doesn't run more than one train. I suppose it could, but the ride is so short you're never going to make use of one train anyway. So just because of the nature of open RCT, this will just stick right out the back and will look just fine. Here's our cute little compact coaster here. This is a good one if you're playing scenario play and you want something cheap that's going to get people through the door and is going to be well received by the guests. This is a good option. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Inspired by is better than recreation, in my opinion. I will always build my rides as inspired by rather than a straight recreation, just because I think it looks, or it gives you the freedom to do what you want while still basing it off of a source material. So that's fine with me. So anyway, there's that guy. So let's take a look at another one. Let's do the shuttle coaster here. So this is Schwarzkopf Shuttle Loop. There are two versions. There is a weight drop and a flywheel. So this was like the original launch coaster. Now Arrow had another launch coaster, which I did a tutorial for my hacking thing. So if you look on YouTube for that, you can find it. But this was kind of the original, really actual launch coaster. And like I said, there's two varieties: weight drop and flywheel. So the weight drop had a big tube on top of the or at the back of the spike here, and it had a big weight in it connected to a cable, and the cable basically pulled the train, and the weight was released, and the whole thing dropped. So dropped, launched, and then there you go. The flywheel, there was a flywheel underneath this last little piece of white track here before the loop, and the flywheel went, and when they engaged the clutch, then the whole thing launched. The flywheel is typically a little more intense, more of abrupt of a launch than the other. But the challenge with this one, and this is the one from Watkins Woods, is that it's not terribly accurate. So let's go have a look again. We're going to hop over to our trusty RCDB, and we are going to take a look at Cascabel. All right. So this is a flywheel shuttle coaster. You can see the house down here where the flywheel was held. And then there's no tube here on the actual launch track itself. But the launch track was pretty long, for one. And then the backside, which you can see there, but I don't know if we can get a good picture of it. Let's see here. There's not a good picture here, so let's move on to a different one. Let's try the Greased Lightning now. How about Toshima Islands? So, okay, here's a good one. So here, you can see the station right here with the launch into the loop. And there, behind the station, there's an entire other set of brakes here on the backside, which the idea was that once this launched, it would go up, and then the brakes would be wide open as it went all the way back up the back spike, and then these brakes would engage, and then the coaster would slow down. So you can see what I have done here. That's the dream job. I gotta say, it's a nice job. I am very happy to be lucky enough to do what I do, and it's pretty great. So, not gonna lie, but it is something that is readily accessible for a lot of people. You just gotta study the right things and make the right connections. I am more than happy to talk about how to do those things at some point. Feel free to message me directly too if you like to know more about all that, because I can certainly offer some insight. Okay, so nitpicky realism and things like this. If you're trying to recreate certain rides, you want to make sure the inversions go the right way. On the Schwarzkopf shuttle loops, the loop goes to the right. So we are going to, in this case, go to the right. There we go. And then what you can do too, if you want to make it a little bit taller, just to give it a little bit of height, because these did have some height to them, we will add another piece right here. Great American Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus is an interesting park. Mount Olympus has a number of surprisingly good coasters, actually, but just an oddball little park. All right, so we have a 7-car train, and here we go, launching maybe a little bit slow, actually. So the real one is going to launch at 57 miles per hour. Now, there's two things that don't translate into the game very well. That's height and that's speed. So you can't necessarily base real-life speeds and real-life heights off of coasters and translate them into RCT, especially height. So the 200-foot mark for a hypercoaster, absolutely not in the game. It's just going to look massive, and it's going to totally dwarf everything else that you do. So I would not recommend it. I would suggest doing it at this this level. So anyway, this adjustment makes this a lot more realistic. Oh, you're right, Hydro. Rip Timber Falls. That was a great coaster, actually. Honestly, within the Mount Olympus area in Wisconsin Dells, Timber Falls was my favorite of that selection. I really enjoyed that coaster. It was a shame to see it go. So now we went from 3 S&S wooden coasters in the U.S. to 1, with that one closing and Tsunami at Clementon closing, or J2, I guess it was called now. A couple of just other notes here. We're using the powered launch right out of the station. You can shoestring this if you really want to use a chain lift up the launch track itself and be all fancy with that. So you launch out and then back it up. You don't really need to. You're going to want to use a powered launch anyways, and then use the chain lift to boost the speed further. The instantaneous launch on these coasters are pretty strong. So I would say you probably want to just go ahead and use the powered launch and leave it at that. Let's see, Elvinwood, you said, it looks like brakes backwards now, doesn't it? It does. So you can adjust this however you want. A lot of the Schwarzkopf shuttle loops that are still existing actually do brake pretty substantially now, just like this one does, and it only goes a partial way up the back spike. That's partly a maintenance thing more than anything. So if you are doing this kind of gritty realism park for like a US park or something like that, that may be a way to go. If you want it to go like it originally operated, then throw those brakes wide open and make it nice and fast. You can kind of do either way. If you're about Iron Wolf or standing coasters in general, I actually like standing coasters. I am probably in the minority of that opinion, but I think standing coasters are surprisingly okay, with a couple exceptions. Iron Wolf was terrible. I'm sorry, it was just not very good. I only rode it when it was at Six Flags America, but pretty rough, pretty unpleasant. Vortex at Carowinds that still exists, that one was not the most pleasant either. But Georgia Scorcher at Six Flags Over Georgia, Riddler's Revenge, and Magic Mountain, both top tier standing coasters and really, really well done. They're great rides. And yeah, you can do anti-merging tricks and bypass the brakes on the way back and then go forward and use the brakes for sure. You know, the other side of the stand-up coasters are the Togos, which were the originals, and they're actually really good. They got a bad rap. Togo got a bad rap because of the U.S. coasters that just weren't very good. So Shockwave at King's Dominion, not very good. But the ones in Japan, fantastic. Actually really, really good. Like, I rode them multiple times. I was lucky enough when I did a Japan trip to go ride every existing Togo stand-up. And really fun. Like, really good rides. So I would recommend all day long. And I would do them again. And yeah, the Iron Wolf just layout is in general really, really good. So I do like it. It's just a shame that it rode poorly. It would have been great to get more trains or more new trains on there with some better restraints and just have a nice overhaul on the ride. But can't win it all, unfortunately. But you know, so it goes. All right. Well, I'm going to take a pause right here and grab a little bit of water, and I would suggest you guys get up and stretch too if you've been here for the hour and a half we've been going so far. I'm going to be back in just a couple of minutes, but I'm going to plop up our Be Right Back screen, and then I will keep on going, and we're going to redo this Vekoma into something that doesn't look terrible. So hang tight, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes. All right, we're back. Hopefully you did remain seated and keep your left bar down. So let's take a look at this one. This one's a little bit of an oddball ride. So this is another one that came from my Watkins Woods Park, and it's a strange coaster. It's a Vekoma SLC, custom SLC, and it did work around some existing stuff. So this trenched section over here was part of the bridge that came across, and then, if I remember right, and I suppose we could just go open the file, but if I remember correctly, we kind of came across like this, and then came through with the path, and then across this way. And then we had a drop tower that was here, and our station and some other things. So it fit the area pretty well, but it's not a terribly realistic coaster, mostly because Vekoma would never really have done stuff like this, at least not back in that point in time. Really, nowadays, they could easily do something like this. Their layouts would have a lot more flow and a lot more low-to-the-ground speed, less looping type inversions and more roll type inversions. If you've seen some of their newer things, such as the new inverted coaster at Tripsdrill, the whole thing is pretty much just roll inversions and fast corners. That's really what their layout designer is doing these days, and he's fantastic. He's one of the best. So I'm a huge fan of their current stuff, but this, as an older Vekoma, not something that you would have generally seen. This start is more B&M than anything else, and the backside here is, the helixes and everything are fine, but it's not a terribly realistic coaster as far as that goes. The flow is pretty nice. The flow kind of follows all of our typical rules as far as, you're coming out of this inversion to the left, and now we're going to turn to the right. We're going to go back to the left again here. We're going to do something after the corkscrews, so I typically don't like to... You definitely try and avoid dropping again after a corkscrew for one, but it does a little bit kind of different things, and we're using some diagonals in here. So it's not a bad layout, it's just from a realistic standpoint, not quite what you'd want to see. So we want it to be more compact, since we're kind of going in this route. So the start of this reminds me of either Talon, Patriot, as far as B&Ms go, or you could even say one of the Batman clones with this curve. More so Talon and Patriot. Patriot especially because you've got the diagonal lift hill into the rest of this. So why don't we try and do something similar to that? We're going to build a B&M inverted coaster. So we're going to start pretty high up, because a lot of B&M inverts start high up. Not to say that they can't start low. You look at Alpengeist, for example, that's one of those that starts more or less on the floor, on the ground. We are going to go for 8 cars per train, so there's a couple of different varieties of these kind of coasters. You can go 7, you can go 8, or you can go 9. I would say never go 9 if you can avoid it, unless you're building something the same size as Alpengeist, which is still essentially the biggest inverted coaster out there, even though Banshee comes close. Don't use 9. It's just too much and too big, and it's the only one that does it, so generally you're going to go with 8. 7 is fine too. The same applies with hypercoasters, but you can use 9 on that one. Most of the original B&M hypercoasters are 9 cars per train. Some of the newer ones are as small as 7 cars per train, such as Mako and the new one that I went to Happy Valley Beijing, I believe, is also 7 cars. So a variety is there. You can have that, but something to think about there. So we're building an older school B&M. So we're not going to have the brakes here because we can't do brakes, but we still are going to put a little bit of a straight section there, and then we'll engage the lift hill here. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is we're going to make this a little bit larger. So we're going to use the larger inversions because, well, no we're not. We're actually going to use smaller. The reason I'm saying that, deciding that on the fly, is because the diagonal lift hill can get really, really long, especially when you use larger stuff. Better than Montu. Ugh. I will disagree, but not too hard because I can understand it. Alpengeist is solid and is a really great coaster. I like Montu better. I think the theming is integrated far better with the trenches and everything, but that's not to say that it's not amazing, because it is. Alpengeist is just incredible. So we're going to use our trusty ghost train here just so we can kind of see what we're doing as we go along. So B&M's fan curves, which is kind of the first drop here, they drop tightly initially, and then they kind of spread out as they get lower, and we'll get there. I'll do you one better. I will say that Pyrenees I will probably take over both of them, both Montu and Alpengeist, but that one's a little bit of a rare one out there. But worth it if you ever get the chance to go. Definitely do it. It's not hard to get there. It's time consuming, but not hard. Okay. So we're going to do this, and let me explain why, because it can look a little bit awkward, especially from this angle. This angle, not so bad. So we want this fan curve to be steep and then shallow. So we can go back and do something similar to what that one does over there, but let's jump back before it drops. But what we want to do is kind of drop down and then swing out. So we're going to drop down and then swing out with the banking here. Now when we flattened ourselves, we added another piece of banked track. And why do we do that? Because if you just go here and go flat, it looks really abrupt. You can kind of see how this line comes down and then goes level. What we're going to do is we're going to flatten it out while it's still banked, and then we're going to level it. So it still has that little transition there, but it looks a little bit better, and the ride itself looks a little smoother as it comes down. Alright, so now we're going to go way up, and we're going to put our coaster here. How do you feel about air launch coasters like Intamin's V2? So that's not air launch. So Intamin's impulse coaster like V2 at Six Flags Great America, that's limb launch. So that's linear induction motors, as opposed to LSM, which is linear synchronous motors. LIM is the higher powered but more power consumption type of launch. But it was a good system. I actually like those coasters a lot. I think they're a lot of fun. They're intense and pretty solid rides. They're just really expensive to operate, and it's not going to surprise me if, for example, Cedar Point takes out Wicked Twister this year. Would not be shocked about that. So we'll see. But they are good rides. Air launch coasters such as, say, Max Force or any of the SNS air launch coasters, those are fun. I like those a lot, actually. Okay, so a couple of challenges we have to deal with here. This loop, first of all, you have to deal with it being underneath the lift hill. If you use the large one, if you made this a little bit taller and then use the large loop, you could probably get it around the lift hill, which is cool. Banshee does that. It's a neat effect from an off-ride standpoint. From an inverted coasters, really, you don't care what the riders see on the view, because unless you're in the front seat, you're not seeing anything. That was one of the drawbacks of Dueling Dragons. So here we added a couple of straight pieces here to get this loop up off the ground a little bit. You don't want to do too many because then it looks awkward, but you want to do enough to slow it down. The only ones where it's really acceptable to go a lot of straight pieces are Arrow, early Arrow and early Vekoma coasters. More so Arrow, because Vekoma started scaling their loops first, but Arrow was really kind of the forefront of the big looping coasters, but they had one design for their loops, and they basically just raised it up in the air until they had the speed that they wanted from the train, and then put that same loop. So whether it's up high or whether it's down low, excuse the voice crack there, let's go take a look at that just as an illustration. So we're going to look at, not Vortex, we're going to look at Viper at Magic Mountain. This is the quintessential one of these guys, because it still exists. But you can kind of see some of the loops here that are just way high up off the ground. So this guy is the same size loop as this guy, but he is way high off the ground. When this one got built, this was the original tallest inversion coaster, and the loop itself wasn't very tall. It just so happened that the thing was very high up off the ground. Okay, have a good lunch. Thank you for stopping by. So it looks stupid, absolutely. Or you look at something like, let's see if, I guess it wouldn't be classified like that anymore. So we'll look at Steel Phantom. Not Steel Phantom. Steel Phantom, I can spell. Which is now Phantom's Revenge, but it was originally an aero coaster that had inversions. If you're not familiar with this coaster, it's worth looking up because it's got an interesting history. This loop was right after this giant dive into the ravine, almost a 200-foot drop into a little tiny loop, and I don't think we're going to get pictures of it, but you came up pretty substantially far into this little tiny loop right after going 70 miles an hour, so it's a bit of an awkward design overall, and this was just as they were starting to get into different inversion shapes like this corkscrew. But anyway, let's jump back into the game. That's your little history lesson. Hopefully the coaster history lessons are interesting. I find them interesting, but that's just... Okay. So let's do another moment here. And we're gonna go to the right side this time, I think. See how this goes off the lift. We're pretty good pacing through there. Pretty good pacing through the 0G roll. You want that to be a little faster than typically would be. You don't want to go too high. You want it to not necessarily crawl through because it's meant to be 0G. Basically, what this is as far as the profiling and the G calculations go is this is an airtime hill that somebody took with their hands and twisted 360 degrees and made a roll out of it. So that's really how you think about it, is this should be the profile of a hill that's got a roll in it. Now, in RCT, we can't do that because we can't actually roll the hill itself. We got to do it flat. So we go up, do the roll, and then come down. I know Mr. Extreme, who has been doing some custom coasters or custom track types out there, like the RMC, which was just recently released. He has shown some proof of concept rolls from a hill, but that will take the new save format to get there. A couple of notes here as we jump back to this. So this is a pre-drop. Right here you can see the little drop and the flat. In RCT, well, not RCT, in real life, the pre-drop was on a lot of the early B&Ms because it took stress off the chain while the ride disengaged the chain before it dropped and went at full speed. So if it dropped right away, the train would torque that chain really badly, hurt the motor, and lower the lifespan of that or increase the maintenance. So that's why you have a pre-drop. There's also a brake on top that basically controlled that speed until it was off the chain lift. Newer B&M coasters don't have that because the chain lift speeds up in conjunction with the ride dropping off the track or off the lift hill. So there's really no need for it anymore. In RCT, when you're diagonal like this, you can't really drop straight into a curving drop, so you're just going to have to deal with it. So that's why, since we have a diagonal here, we're just going to throw the pre-drop in, and we're going to make this an older style B&M inverted coaster because there's really nothing else you can do there. Difference between an Immelman and a Sidewinder in RCT. In RCT, practically nothing. The only thing that would make... honestly, we're building a Sidewinder more than anything. If we use the large half loop, which gives us an offset... use the inline twist and then drop it out, that's an Immelman. Typically, the difference is that an Immelman goes in more or less the same direction that you went initially. whereas the Sidewinder goes off to the side 90 degrees or so. The Sidewinder was more or less what Arrow and Vekoma called theirs. The reverse Sidewinder is what we would also call the dive loop. So that's the consideration there. But in the game, we're going to call this we're going to call that an element there if you want. Ideally, it would be a little bit different. We are going to go ahead and pull this way, other way. There it goes. So this gets away from a little bit of some of the flow rules in that typically when you have an inversion here that drops down, you don't want to drop right away again. Inwinds and dive loops are awkward though, because you want to continue that drop because that's what the real inversion does. So it's a kind of a back and forth thing as to what you want to do for it, but I like to drop again just to keep it going. So we're gonna do that here. We don't have a lot of speed to work with on this ride, so this one we really kind of cruise through a pretty substantially long coaster, and this is according to feet, this is 2,697, so about 2,700 feet. That's not too bad for a inverted coaster. Usually you're going to see them a little bit longer than that, but with the speed that we're working with here, you want to look at some other options. With this kind of a coaster, I would typically be going a little bit shorter. Airtime hills, not a thing on these kind of coasters. You really want to avoid that. Not to say that it wasn't done. Dueling Dragons had a very famous one on theirs, as it went over the fire side, went over the ice side. But that was purely for the dual spot on purpose. There's really no particular reason why you would have one. Otherwise, the over-the-shoulder restraints kind of kill any airtime you would get. Now, you can, level it out and do something like that if you want. I just don't generally think that it's something that you ought to go ahead and do. Okay. Changing my mind again. I'm thinking we're going to turn this way. And what I would suggest too, from a builder's block standpoint, if you can't figure out what you're doing, just keep going with it. Keep trying to figure out how you're going to build it. And even if you're not super happy with it, just finish it. And then come back and look at it a little bit later and see where you are. And maybe you'll have a different kind of epiphany and want to change it differently. I can say for sure right here, I'm not thrilled with how this is turning out, and I'm guessing the speed here isn't going to be correct either, but it might be. Actually, that's surprisingly not bad as far as corkscrews go. Red Airtime Hill had... It did. So this kind of thing here, you wouldn't normally see. This one you wouldn't normally see either. Honestly, this was to give me the space to do this helix, so that's not terribly realistic. This one you can kind of say would be, because you're kind of rising up into a diving corner, so that if you smooth that out in real life, that would kind of be an up and down into a drop sort of design. So I think it's a little bit nebulous there. I think that one's kind of okay, but typically you'll avoid it. Look at these colors a little bit differently. Since we're copying Patriot, we might as well make it fancy. Not that fancy, let's mute that. Okay. So a couple of different things you can do just as you're coming along. You really want to focus you want to focus inverted coasters on hills, or on turns, generally like helix type turns, banked turns, things like that. And that's usually kind of where the focus should lie for those. Let's go ahead and put our block brakes in here as well. And so since we're only going to be running 2 trains, we have no mid-course brake run. We'll build our 1 section here in the back, so about 5 to 6 pieces, and then a couple more similar, and there we go. That's be a little bit long, but not too bad. That sounds like a proper brake run there. As far as corkscrews go, which on inverted coasters are not called corkscrews, they're called wingovers. A wingover is B&M's term, and the reason that they use that is that these are not corkscrews. Corkscrews, you are already banked when you come in, and it's just a continuous curve, and then you're banked when you come out. A wingover starts without banking, does the inversion, and then ends without banking. Because of that, B&M inverted coasters don't have double corkscrews because you can't do it. You can't do a double wingover in a row. If it's a corkscrew, you can do that. So if you look up Anaconda at Gold Reef City, it looks similar to a B&M because it was made by Giovanola, who fabricated B&M's track for quite a while in the 90s. But that one is, those inversions have banking on the way in and through the middle, so you can do a double roll there. But with the way that the current wingover element is designed, because it's not a corkscrew, you don't have the ability to do 2 of them in a row. So generally you don't want to do back-to-back corkscrews like you would on an aero coaster, for example. In general, B&M doesn't do back-to-back corkscrews anywhere, but that's not to say that they wouldn't. You certainly could do the additional engineering to make that happen, but not to say that you couldn't or wouldn't. Alright, so we're gonna keep on trucking through this, and I'm surprised that fits. Couple of thoughts here. Let's cross over and then go back down. So what I want to typically avoid is straight side-by-side interaction like here. I don't want to have this track go right next to this track, A, because it's going to be a pain in the rear to put supports a little later on, and B, because you're just not really going to see that with a coaster that close together, so you want to give it a little bit of distance as you go along. You do something that works back to the brake run here. I'm not terribly happy with any of these designs at the moment, but this little figure eight's not too bad. What I don't quite like here and doesn't flow super well is coming out of this diagonal, down this drop, and then going through this curve again. Let's take a look at an invert that I had already built. I can't construct this in the... Here we go. So if you are familiar with Pyrenees at Parque España in Japan, do I turn on clearance checks for inverted coasters because they need more room underneath? I don't. Typically I try and build them with that clearance. So it's again not necessarily requirement that you build it exactly like that. You can turn off some clearance checks just because it makes it a little easier. And actually this coaster that we're looking at here I did turn off, and I'll show you where. But I try and keep it on wherever I can. I actually don't like seeing coasters that are built with 0 clearances if you can help it, but sometimes you can't help it. And as long as it doesn't look bad from all the angles, then I think you're all right. But you just want to try and avoid it in general. But so let's take a look at this guy. This is using kind of our standard tendency here. So we have our little pre-drop, but we do have our brakes here, our pre-lift. Our pre-drop is up here. We have a for the big ones here, I like to put a space, one flat piece here, which would have the brakes on it typically. So the real coaster, Pyrenees at Parque España in Japan, has the start like a Batman coaster. It has a loop, a 0G roll, and another loop. And then it has a curve into a Cobra roll. I changed it up a little bit. I have an Immelman here. This is a way to build an Immelman. There's a lot of different ways. None of them are great in RCT, but this is one way. And then we have our secondary loop here. And then here's our little curve. This is meant to be in a trench, so that's why the rest of this coaster is sitting high up. Typically these bottom pieces of these hills will be right along the ground. This bit through the loop is the one that I zero clearanced because it wasn't catching properly there. Not the best way to go about that, but it's not awful. Here again is kind of similar to that airtime hill that we had talked about earlier. It's not necessarily intended as an airtime hill. It's kind of just a rise up into a curving drop. Not specifically set for airtime, so you can kind of understand that one. The diagonal breaks here, I mean, I think everybody knows well enough. You can do diagonal breaks in the game if you shoestring it, but that's also a pain. You can also just kind of fudge the look like this, and while it cruises through there like crazy, it still is, in my opinion, a good look, and I think sometimes looks better than not. Even for block breaks too, you can use the trick where you put the piece of chain lift just before it, and so long as you set it so that the coaster isn't going to get caught up on that chain lift because the next block isn't clear, then I think you're alright. I can't fault that one too hard. These corkscrews are a little bit fast. So this one here, actually, well, let's take a look at this guy. Let's take a look at these speeds. Alright. Dip's good for positive G's. You generally want to avoid it. You're going to get the pullouts on all the inversions anyways. So I would really avoid doing straight airtime or dip type hills. Straight elements are not what this kind of coaster is about. It's really about the curves. So more than anything, you want to be a little bit slow to go that route. You want to do more corners than anything. That corkscrew, or flat spin, if you were paying attention to the speed there, was entered at around 42 miles per hour. You generally want to get into the 30s when you enter. You can put trim brakes on the layout. That's a big thing in real coasters, to make sure they perform exactly every time. The difference is that in RCT, the coaster is going to perform exactly every time because it's a computer game. So you don't have to worry about that so much. So you can put a trim in there, and sometimes I do that for the visual aspect of having a trim brake, but I don't actually use it. Like, I just put the trim in there and turn it up to 63 miles an hour, or build it as just a fake track, whatever that may be. So you can avoid that also. But what I would suggest, if you need a trim brake on your layout to make it work, is to redo it, because typically you're not going to have a layout right away that's just not going to work right because it needs a trim brake. So I'd just try and avoid it. I think you're better off just not. But I mean, if you need one, you can hide one in there. It's not the end of the world. There's building realistically in RCT is a balance between just fudging it and trying to make it work with the capabilities that you have within the space. So this brake run is probably long enough, I would say, when we're looking at brakes. This straight bit here on the diagonal, I would have made maybe another 2 tiles longer if I had the ability to. I think that would have been better potentially, but you can take it or leave it. I think It's alright. Alright, so what all have we done so far? We've done quite a few. Is there a coaster type that you guys want to see that you'd like me to build and try and work on through? Want to understand some details behind it and that kind of thing. Back to this. Bobsled. Alright. Sure. We'll look at that. I have a couple of things to say about bobsled here. And then I will do B&M Wing Coaster after that too, because that's an interesting one. Alright, so bobsled coasters are two different varieties of bobsled coasters. There is the Intamin Flying Turns, which is the single vehicle. This is like Bob at Efteling or Lava Bora at Six Flags Over Texas, or Alpine Bobsled at Great Escape in New York. Or there's the Mock Rides type, which is train-based, so it's usually a 7-car, 2-person train that has basically just a little same kind of a channel. The Mock Rides ones use tubular steel that's welded together. The Intamin ones use plate steel that's also welded together. So two different approaches to an equally interesting ride. I actually like bobsleds a lot in real life. In RCT, they're lousy because they don't have the pieces that you need. So in RCT, it's just there's not the pieces that you need to do it properly. But we're gonna give it a shot. So first bit, get our train set up. We're gonna do 7 cars. In general, where I can, I like to put flat pieces. I said earlier that I don't ever do a lift right off of a curve, which is true. If you go look at the mine train and all that, I always put a straight section there. I didn't here because you just don't have the space for it, but I want to orient it as best as I can, so I do have the flat section there. Alright, so you don't need a huge lift hill for these. None of them are terribly big. Honestly, the longest one of these is, I think it's Park Asterix. It's either theirs or Hyde Park's. But they're not terribly large, and they're really focused on corners only. You don't see a whole lot of other stuff. So you don't have diagonals to work with in the game. You really should, but you don't. So unfortunately, so it goes. There we are. So you got to use these helix pieces to your advantage to do the right kind of ride. So usually the standard, well, I shouldn't say standard, but a lot of the mock bobsleds have a first half that's pretty short. So it's got the lift hill, it's got a helix or two, and then a drop, and then a climb before a mid-course break, and then a longer, kind of twistier second half. So that's what we're going to do here for this one. Now, in the game, these can fly off and hit people, or kill your riders, I suppose. So you got to be cautious of that as you come through. But the let's cross over here. So you just have to watch out as you level off your drops. So you're generally going to come back up and then go through the corner and then hit the block breaks here. This is pretty early on for a set of block breaks, for example, but it's not too bad, and it's pretty in line with what you would have on a typical one like this. Yeah, Sunrise. Tres de Ora is great. It's the only non alpine themed bobsled in the world, and well, mock bobsled. The one in over Texas themed to a snake, but it's the only mock bobsled that's not themed to alpine, so it already wins points there for me. And I just like the layout in general. It's long. It's got two mid-course brake runs on the thing, so it's a pretty substantially big ride. But it's a good coaster, really good coaster actually. Okay, let's what we'll do is got it. What's up, Belgian guy? How you doing? Always hard when you have multiple platforms and multiple handles trying to keep up with everybody. We're actually not going to go into the big helix just yet, so we're going to start small here. The challenge that you want to do is you really just want to keep going with corners and things like that through the whole layout. So you want to kind of do something like this where it's all in line, but since you don't have the diagonal to work with, you can't make it look quite as nice. Because I find one of the challenges with bobsleds is trying to make them interesting while still doing something different with them. Because it's pretty easy to make the standard bobsled type layouts, but making something that's got a little more interesting as elements to it goes can be a challenge at times. We'll just drop this down, and now one of the kind of key things to remember here as you're doing bobsled layouts is that not all the helixes have to be downwards. Some of them can be upwards, and usually you're going to have at least one at the end of the layout that goes upwards versus the rest. Usually you're not going to have a big stacked helix too, but you may have some that do that. There was one bobsled called Munich Autobahn that that was existing in Kobe Portopia land in Japan, that's since closed and is since waiting for a buyer. And that had a stacked helix like that. So, interesting design, but not necessarily something that typically go for. Okay, so we'll keep this down. Gonna keep That's Intamin, who does the other ones that have the single vehicles. So I actually think that turns out okay. The challenge that you run into here is that there's no space for a brake run. So you could something like this, and then bring that in. Now, a couple of thoughts here is that brake run is too short, and I think the close. Yeah, the brake run is too short for one. You generally see a lot more space in brake runs for these kind of rides, but we'll leave it at that for now because I want to show something else. Made a Mobius bobsled. No Mobius bobsled has ever existed, but that's pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I do like some variety in there. That's kind of why I'm interested to see the contest entries for this, just because there's so little variety in what you can do with RCT bobsleds that I'm pretty excited to see what options people are going to put together when they use a little bit of fantasy in there and make it look good. Custom support a bend as a flying turns would have. That's tough. You know, personally, I would end up with something similar to a just like a wooden coaster overlay underneath, potentially, but I don't know. Support college. I could do it. You guys are going to be in for a long video probably, but I can certainly do it. It's a lot of just jumping back and forth between RCDB and changing angles in the game and trying to get it to look right. So here's something that I saw from someone, I can't remember who it was, but I thought this was an interesting idea. Is building a bobsled on a diagonal. So you do this, you can actually get the bobsled to do what you want it to do. Which, this is, if you're going to do a flying turns, for example, this is kind of the way that a lot of older flying turns were done, is this sort of a stacked layout on the diagonal. Now keep in mind, Ovenwood, if I did supports for it, I would be using custom scenery, because that's how I build. So the having I wouldn't actually know where to even start with no custom scenery objects as part of that. That sounds horrendous, honestly. So more power to you guys. Yeah, it's not my thing. I respect what you guys do on Dirklink server and RCNF and some of that. I just can't do it. It's not my thing. See, what we will do here though is take this to the coaster. Unfortunately, that looks a little bit rough in the game, but not awful. Actually, what we can do is put our one block break in here, and then we're gonna... Actually, we'll make this even smaller, because as a flying turns wooden coasters, and granted there's only one existing, but it's got a 3-car train, not a larger train. So let's kind of go through this. We're not going to use the chain there. I have seen some people do that for brakes, is use the chain lift, which simulates the look of the brakes, which honestly not a bad idea. I can get behind that as an idea. I think it's pretty clever. So let's if we stay level here, then we can do this. So here's an idea for you. A little bit more of a non-traditional bobsled idea. We'll call it a 4-car train. Box brake cannot be used. Oh, I must have had lift hill turned on here. Let's give it a try. There it is. Whack. Let's take a look. Do you think it would be possible for a bobsled to go backwards, like a backward section? Possible? Yes. I don't think anybody would do it. Bobsleds are pretty limited for one, and as far as I know, Intamin doesn't make theirs anymore. It's only Mock Rides that makes theirs, and really nobody's going to buy the Mock one because it's really expensive. It turns out that all those little welded tubes are really pricey, so not something that a lot of parks are going to spring for at the moment. But yeah, I would say. Yeah, you could. I actually don't know how their chassis are made, though, if they can properly back up and things like that. But I guess it's certainly within the realm of possibility. I just don't quite see anybody having done it, potentially. But anyway, so there's a bobsled. That's an option for you. Now, granted, the steep doesn't quite work, so I would think you'd want to do shallow the whole way up, but it's a little bit different there. But let's look at Wing Coaster, since that was another one that was brought up. Let's see here. Wing Coaster. So we're gonna use I don't know if it was Space K or who did the Wing Coaster trains here, but we're gonna use them. Bobsled's one of those interesting coaster fads that is interesting, but I think it's just really not going to take off. Or it kind of had its run and went. Where can you ride a bobsled or flying turn still in the US? So you can ride the only wooden flying turns in the world at Knoebels in Pennsylvania. That's really good and surprisingly scary for as small as it is. You can ride an Intamin bobsled at Great Escape in New York or Six Flags Over Texas in Dallas. Those are the only two remaining Intamin bobsleds. The one at Great Escape, I understand, is closed pretty often, so kind of good luck on it. I was able to ride it when we went for whatever reason. It was open, and the mock bobsled, the only one is in King's Dominion in Virginia. That's the only one in the U.S. There's more of those in Europe, but yeah, so those are the places that you'd go for it. Yeah, you're right, Poachin Guy. The friction is not correct on these, so that's one of the first tips that I would have is be ready to adjust your friction on these coasters because I think they need to be adjusted. Gonna be too big, I think. Take a look at what that looks like when you drop it. Yeah, that's too big. There we go, that's a little better. Alright, so this is a B&M wing coaster. You can kind of do a couple of different things. The steepness of the lift hill is is up for debate. You can go shallow, or you can go... Oh, did X make them? Okay. I will credit him for these guys. Let's take a look at them. Yeah, I believe he did, because he made the vertical drop ones too. Okay, so we're going to go with a 7-car train, even though that's still awfully big. They do make them in 8 variety. Actually, you know what? We'll go for 8 because we're going to need all the momentum we can get. Anyway, back to lift hills. So lift hills can be of a couple of different kinds of steepness. I mean, in RCT, you've got shallow and steep. Shallow's like 30% grade, and steep is, I don't know, probably, I wouldn't say 60, but it's up there, probably close. So it's 30, 60, and 90, I suppose, as far as the steepness goes. So a typical lift hill on a B&M coaster is going to be in the low 40s, like so 40 to 42% incline, perhaps. So it's a little steeper than shallow, but it's a little shallower than the steeper lift hill. In some cases, I think the steep looks better. In some cases, I think the shallow looks better. Early B&Ms use shallower lift hills. A shallower lift hill takes less torque to pull the train up because it doesn't have the inclination. So you can do the... if you're doing an early B&M, especially, like one of the early 90s B&Ms, you're going to have a shallow lift hill. If you go for one of the newer ones, it might be steep. It also kind of depends on what space you've got to work with. So anyway, let's see what this looks like. Probably too big. We'll leave it around here right now. So these especially, we're going to go off of the lift hill. And then we are going to roll this and go straight in here. So it depends how you want to do this. And actually, we're going to drop this down just a minute and then go into the roll. So the way that this is kind of the signature element on these coasters, the way that they're meant to be is that this kind of level bit on top is sloped slightly downwards, and then you roll into the roll drop, what it's called, and then go that way. Let's jump over to the database real quick and we can take a look at one of these. So X-Flight at Great America, this was one of the first ones that had the roll drop in the US, but we're not going to get any good pictures of it, are we? So let's go look at, how about Swarm? A lot of other close pictures here. Okay, how about the one at HB World? There we go, a little bit. Not still the best, but this maybe? Okay, so here you can see it. So this is that Huawei Brothers Movie World in China. This is a newer one, but you can see the lift hill goes level, has a couple of pieces, and then it goes through the roll and then into the drop. You want to get, again, the whole coaster level before you roll and get off the lift hill, because you don't want to whip that thing off the chain. A, it's going to be some weird G-forces for those people, and B, it's going to cause some additional stress on the chain lift itself. So what we're going to do is have a couple of pieces there, drop off, and then roll. It looks a little bit awkward when it's naked like this, but once you get the theming on it, put some catwalks and things like that, it's going to look way better. So something to keep in mind is the shaping of the trains here. Let's test it and close it real quick. Or actually here I can just test it. You can see here they're just extending through the station platform itself. This is a ride made for custom stuff. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna catch myself one of these days. I appreciate you guys. So this is where we're looking here. Let's make sure that we keep the spacing correct. We're gonna do a loop here. Close. Too bad. And let's do a roll over top of the station. Be kind of cool. We're actually just a little too close here, so like I said before, don't be afraid of straight track. Go back through here, and we're gonna drop a couple of straight pieces in there. Then I'm gonna actually go back through, and so that's a pretty good 0G roll. Honestly, a little bit quick, but not awful. But we're gonna come down here. Cool. Be about doing a roll. See how this takes it. This might be a little bit too slow, potentially. Ooh, yeah. A little bit slow, but to be honest, we can play with the we can play a little bit with the friction. If you really want to go that way. There's a couple of different things we can do here. I was trying to see if I could make this go back underneath the station, but we're gonna... I don't recommend hiding like boosters or anything else. That just doesn't look good in general. The demon knot. I actually had tried to do one of those a little bit ago in the game, and it just doesn't look very good. It really really just doesn't work out terribly well. I'm assuming when you mean speed it up and using console command, you mean changing the friction for it, right? Okay, yes. Yeah, increase mass. So you just do ride set mass, and that will speed the whole thing up. So these rides are about really in anything you want, to be honest. What you need to keep in mind is the trains are wide. So because the trains are wide, you're gonna have some challenges with inversions. So you're not gonna get really snappy inversions. Like you're not gonna see a cobra roll on these things. You're not gonna see a regular corkscrew or wing spin or wing over on these things. Flat spin, I guess, is what the sit-down version of that is called. So you're not going to see any of those kind of inversions. It's more so based on the kind of stretched inversions and things like that. So wider loops, you're going to see a lot of rolls. You're going to see a lot of Immelmans and dive loops for change of direction, and you're going to see some weird inversions. So let's take a look at a weird inversion. We're going to jump back to RCDB, and I'm going to remember this time. I will. Maybe. Here's this guy in the foreground. So we've got our dive drop, we've got our loop, 0G roll. Here's an Immelman that's kind of tilted on its side. And then you have this thing that halfway rolls and then halfway kind of slowly comes out of it. So it's almost like a half 0G roll, half inline twist that comes out on the side and then drops into this helix, and then you have this really big stretch flat spin here at the end. So it's a challenge to look. To look at. Are the vehicles as wide as the vertical drop? I think they're a little wider, to be honest. I would say they're definitely wider than the 6 deep. They're probably more like the 8 that Exus made. Or I know he also made the 10. So it is pretty easy to get these to be kind of intense. So you just have to watch out for what's going on there. Oh, in real life. Wider, I would say, because the 6 across vertical drop coasters are, the 6 seats are pretty close to each other. The seats on wing coasters have the chassis in between, and then hang completely over the side, so it is probably more in line with the 8 across there. We're going to turn that into a drinking game next time, so pack a lot of alcohol. Alright. So now we have our coming across here, that's Immelman, and then we have an inclined corner that comes down across on this side, and you can do a couple of different things. You generally don't want to curve back again. This is something that I had mentioned with flow before, is that since I've curved right here, I don't want to go down and then curve right again unless I've got a really good reason for it. If I don't have a good reason for it, then there's really no reason to do it. So I would say let's still go ahead with doing this one. What I'm also trying to avoid is doing too much over top of the station, because I don't want to be too in the way of things there. So like I don't want to get I don't want to cause an issue later on if I'm trying to build a station and then this thing is just up and all up in its business. I want to try and keep it a little bit on its own. The one thing that this coaster does that a lot of ENMs don't is has slow rolls. That's one of the tenets of the thing, actually. Some of the ending inversions are just really slow barrel rolls, which is pretty interesting. Ooh, that's crawling over there, but we are going to adjust the mass a little bit. But we'll see. Let's so yeah, like I said, they have slow rolls. And then you can do a lot with the theming. You have the keyhole inversions, the famous one being Cedar Point's on Gatekeeper, where it goes through the entrance, which is beautiful inversion, just incredible look. We can. But one of the things that I'll do sometimes to try and keep it keep some variety going, so like in this helix drop, you can do this kind of a helix, or you can drop it and then immediately come back up with a helix and then turn it again. Kind of helps give it a little bit of variety. Like I use those helix pieces when I can, but rarely, like on a B&M, you're never going to see this kind of a helix, except on Hollywood Dream Hypercoaster in Universal Japan. For whatever reason, that one just does it. I don't know why. But for the most part, you're going to have the variable incline helixes doing different helix type stuff. So that's that's something you want to avoid. But if you have like half a turn, such as this one, like that, then I think you can do that helix and then maybe change up a different different type of turn for the rest of it. Go ahead and decide how we're going to finish this. This is mostly about inversion so far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. We can do this sort of S-bend thing. You kind of don't want to do that usually because it looks a little bit awkward, but sometimes it can be alright. But let's do another set of blocks here and then a little more. Okay. That's probably the full length that we want to go. What I might do is work our way around the station here, and then we can do this slow roll up above. We'll dive down and have this nice little drop here, which I'm gonna come back and put. When you use the shallow pieces in drops, it looks better the steeper the drop, or the more steep pieces you have in it. So like line here. So this one looks better because it's got this nice size steep drop and then levels out here. With what we're doing here, that looks a little awkward potentially. The straight bit there at the end, but there's not a whole lot you can do about it, and I still think it's the better option among not having it. So I would still recommend to have it, despite it looking a little awkward. Yeah, you're right, Belgian guy. It's a challenge to figure out which way is which, and honestly, every one of the wing coasters that I've ridden in real life, it definitely has a good side and it has a bad side, or at least an average side and a good side. So I think there's a definite consideration you have to give to how the ride experience is going to be on either side, and is it going to be different? Is it going to be pretty similar, or what's it going to do that that one side does, but the other side might not? In my opinion, usually the side that wins is the side that is that goes up. So here on the dive drop, so on here it'll be the right side which goes up and then yanks down, versus the left side where it drops down and then comes back up and then gets yanked down. So it's tough. It's tough to find something that really works there. Let's finish this thing. See if this one actually would work. Oh, it would actually. Good. And then we'll come back up to this. Okay, there we go. So not the most pretty layout, I suppose, but I think it'll be alright. The brake run is not long enough, as far as criticism of this one would go. We would, for the 2 trains, we would probably want it a little bit longer, or to look at the 7-car trains. That would make it look a little more in proportion. So I I think this is okay. And it kind of has the usual hallmarks of this kind of a ride. Let's take a look. Drop off that slow inversion here. Is it possible to split the queue to simulate both sides? Unfortunately not. You can have multiple stations for one ride, but usually the peeps are going to preference one side, so it's not going to really give you the effect that you want to. The best way that I could see doing it is to sync a dummy ride and do a coaster down below and sync it up with your coaster above so that it loads at the same time. So then they pour in. The challenge you're going to have is that it's 2 full queue lines, which you can set one up as like a fast pass queue or something, but that's what I think is your best bet for that kind of thing. Alright, well, we are approaching 3 hours here, so does somebody want to give me one more that you'd like to see? And then we'll go ahead and look at that one, and then we will call it a day for session 1, and then we'll figure out what we want to do for the next time. I kind of like how this turned out. Give it that X-Flight paint job. Alright, hyper. Yeah, so we'll do a hyper. One of the things that I want to do, maybe we'll do this in the next session, which if you guys like this, we'll do it again next Saturday. Are the layouts similar to or to flying coasters? Not so much. Flying coasters are going to be less inversion focused and more turn focused, sensation of flying type elements. We will do a flying coaster next time, and I think they're fun to build, but they're a challenge to build for sure. But they're definitely a lot more turn focused and things like that. But you can do quite a lot there. Intimate multi-launch. Yeah, we'll do that one. We'll do that one next time too. But since I saw hyper first, we're gonna do that, but next time we're actually gonna do it again because I want to do a comparison of all the different hypers. So we're gonna build like 4 hypercoasters next time. We're gonna build an Arrow, we're gonna build a Morgan, we'll build an Intamin, and we'll build a B&M, and we'll also build like a modern Intamin versus the traditional Intamin, and we can kind of see what the different varieties are, so you can kind of compare what makes each one of them special for the different type of what they are. Alright, so hypercoaster, we're gonna have a 9-car train. We're gonna build an old school hypercoaster. Let's jump straight into the lift hill. As I said before, don't pay any attention to the height markers in the game as far as height, like elevation goes. A true hypercoaster, by the marketing definition, is 200 feet tall, but if you hit 200 feet tall in the game, it's going to look stupid. If you try and do that for a Giga Coaster, it's also going to look stupid. Oh, good point, Subject Guy. We will also do a mock hypercoaster too, because those are interesting, and they're the only one that has inversions among that. Alright, so let's level off here, and then we're gonna drop down. This is sort of a little bit of an extended start there, but the thing about B&M hypercoasters is that they do not have ejector airtime. Their seats cannot handle ejector airtime. There are restraints they would have to fully redesign for ejector airtime for the proper containment. So all of B&M's hills are anywhere from 0 Gs to about -0.5, but we're not going to get to the -1, which classifies as ejector airtime. There are more recent things like Mako, SeaWorld Orlando, for example. Those are going to have some stronger airtime than some of the older ones like Apollo's Chariot, but they're all built around floating airtime, which means long, drawn-out hills or hills that have the speed pretty much just right. So that's something to pay attention to here when you're building these guys. So here, this is the next step down from the height here. So we're going to do one of those guys, and then we're going to, we can do another one of those, but we're actually gonna, yeah, let's see here, we'll test this out and see what we're working with. I'm gonna speed up that lift hill just a little bit, and speed this up. Alright. Take a look at this. So that's got a nice glide over top of it. And ideally you want each of the hills to be a little bit smaller than the next, but the step down between removing one of these steep pieces is pretty substantial, so we're going to make these the same height. You can only really do that 2 in a row. After that you should make them smaller. But then, there we go. Alright, so now we have our turnaround. The turnaround could be as simple as a hammerhead stall where it just kind of goes up, turns around, and comes back down. A little bit challenging in RCT in that you don't have that nuance in cornering. In the case of one of those, I would probably suggest something like this. And gonna come across that way. Actually, that may not be a bad turnaround for us here, but let's actually level this down. We're gonna go you know what, we are actually gonna stick with that one. It's a decent look. So I'm using the steep pieces here for this flat to steep elements, just because I think they work well for these large inversions, but then you have to make sure that you transition, or the large elements, but you have to make sure that you transition quickly to the other pieces and don't make it look too abrupt. So what we're gonna do here, I'll make sure you need to make sure your mid-course is at least as long as the train is. That's a key feature. Okay, so we're gonna drop off again with slightly less deep start here, and go through. So that's 13, so that's gonna be a little bit too low. So now we're gonna come through, start into these kind of elements. If you do lower hills or you need to turn the corner on these kind of coasters, I would really suggest you do a you do just the shallow hills only. So you go shallow up, turn the corner with a diagonal, for example, and then drop back down again. If you do just a straight hill, shallow hill, like let's say you wanted to do one of these guys, you want to put a flat piece on the top because you want to make sure that it's really long and drawn out, because that's kind of what this is based off of, or what these kind of hills are going to be set up for. Okay. What's that Woody with the insanely long tunnel? That is Hades 360. So that's at Mount Olympus. Yeah, so it's an interesting coaster in that it started out as just Hades. It was a Gravity Group. It was their first one, actually. But then they came through and redid it a couple years ago and added the additional hill, or the additional roll at the end, and so it had an inversion. It was actually the first fully wood coaster inversion, because RMCs aren't really that. So it was one of the first ones to do that. And then they added the new Gravity Group Timberliner trains on there. It's a pretty interesting design. Decent ride. It has a 90-degree banked corner in the tunnel, as well as a outward banked corner, which is especially interesting. Do something unorthodox. Yeah, Liam. How about well, this one was pretty unorthodox. How about this, Liam? Were you here for that? The diagonal bobsled. That's about as unorthodox as I'm getting today. And here we're going about as orthodox as we can with this one. Let me go ahead and put the brake run in. Go ahead and put this in, turn the corner. That's probably about enough hill here. So we're going very Apollo's Chariot here as far as this goes, with 2 hills out, a turnaround, a brake run, 3 in a row, and then some curving little bits here, but alright. Level this out. I dream about coasters. Sometimes. It's hazards of the job, I suppose. We'll go ahead and do something similar to this, but ideally we want to get this to line up, so we see what this is. If you hold down Control when you have enough selected, or when you have multiple land tiles selected, you can show kind of where you're sitting here. So it looks like in order to get that to line up exactly, I would need 2 more. So instead, we'll do that. We're gonna do our trick that we talked about earlier. If we go down on the drop, then we'll come back up. And then we're gonna do. Sorry, if you just hold, if you have your land tile and you have, you know, whatever it is, maybe 10, you just hold the Control key. Depending on where you have your cursor on the map, is you get this this nice little line. The other thing that you can do as far as land tile goes, if you just have one selected and you hold the Control key, it selects an entire side, so you can do this kind of thing. I find this one less useful than I find the straight pieces, but you can do as you wish. But I do find those be occasionally helpful. Nine we want. We're gonna leave it at that. It's not my favorite way to end it. I'd probably do something more interesting, but this is a pretty straightforward, old school B&M hypercoaster layout. you can do an angled brake run. That's more of a newer thing when we're using magnetic brakes. So the angled brake runs have magnetic brakes. Early B&M coasters did not use magnetic brakes, or to the extent that they use them now. It was all friction type brakes, where it was better to be level. Now they're using magnetic brakes. It's kind of where they're set now. Let's see here. You don't like how the bunny hop has a larger radius on top than on bottom. It doesn't have a larger radius, it has the same radius. Oh shoot. No, you're right. Alright, no stand for that. Alright, what do we have to do with? I had to get up to 3. It's fine, we'll just leave it level. That was a good catch, because you're right, that doesn't look good. That absolutely does not look good. Yeah. And I guess you could easily drop this into an incline brake run if you did that on this type of coaster. I don't think it would be out of place, but it's a little bit. You can point out whatever you want. Feel free to be a dick. My way is not the only way, and I am always open to suggestions. There we have a little bit of a slow go for our mid-course brake run, but again, you need to make sure that your coaster can complete the cycle even if it stops on the brake run. So since we have pretty good pace over here, I would assume that we would be okay to make it. This helix is a little bit odd, not quite something B&M would do in this instance, but not terrible. And this is too slow right there. Surf Coaster Leviathan is a Togo coaster in Japan at Sea Paradise. Oh, you're gonna get. Because this is so slow, we're gonna instead do a shorter hill like that. And then we could pop up into the... You could pop up into the brakes if you wanted and do something like that instead, but I think that's going to be the better option. There we are. Alright, well, I think if we look at our kind of mess of attractions here, I think that's going to be it for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. What did you say here? Before you added the helix, I thought the coaster was too boring. Well, I'm glad the helix saved it. For you, Liam. I don't like straight out and back coasters like this. I prefer to have something interesting, so that's kind of why I wanted to do it. But we'll stick with that now. But yeah, I think we will make this a Saturday thing, so we'll just do Saturday at 2, and I'll continue to advertise it like I do. So hopefully you guys got something out of it. Don't know if we'll always go for 3 hours, but I think we certainly had enough people here, which I appreciated, and thank you for the participation and the comments. I do like that, and getting a lot of that. So thank you for joining me, and we're gonna end it off right there. So yeah, we went for 3 hours. Let's we'll go for 2 next time, maybe. It might not always be coaster layouts. I'm open to suggestions. I know I'm on all the various different servers that you guys are on, or Discord, so just message me wherever you see me and let me know what you want to see, and we can find something interesting. But this will be put on YouTube whenever I can edit it down a little bit, because I'm not going to upload a 3-hour video because you guys already tell me my videos are too long. So I just need to pick out some of the highlights perhaps and then put those up, and then I'll go ahead and go through all those. But yeah, I think that we can make something more of this, and hopefully we'll just continue to tailor it to what people are looking for in the game, so I can teach realism in whichever way you want to see it. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and we're gonna call it off here. So until next time, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.